Hi everyone, I heard your requests, as well as the one I had back in 2017, from me. Hey, in 6 years, if a potential remake of Rune Factory 3 comes out, can you make a video about it? Yeah, okay. I've had this video idea for about 6 years now, since I got into some silly farming game all those years ago. And the experience was so unique, interesting, and immersive to me that I really wanted to talk about it in a video someday. So I drafted up a script for an eventual Rune Factory 3 video, but motivation eventually swayed up and down, resulting in me just checking back and revisiting the script every now and again. And that was all it was. Just an on and off passion project for a game that opened me up to a brand new franchise. That was until...
Restore peace between humans and monsters.
Huh. Past me was right. So today, I finally fulfill that wish. But first, let's talk about what the hell is up with farming sims anyway. Whether it be its repetitive gameplay, rather mundane setting, or the art style sharing the same one as... this, I get it. Farming simulator games, let alone games with an anime art style in general, are an acquired taste for sure. That way of thinking didn't stop Bokujo Monogatari though. Starting in 1996, for the Super Famicom came the very first title in the series called Bokujo Monogatari. I hope I pronounced that right. Created by Yasuhiro Wada and developed by Amkis, then Victor Interactive Software starting in 1997, which was later acquired by Marvelous in 2003. The game was eventually brought over to the West and localized as Harvest Moon, which became the title that really helped define the brand overseas. For better or for worse. This localization was run by Natsume, who would continue to localize the series until the falling out happened between the original developers Marvelous all the way back in 2014. That didn't stop Natsume though. You just can't keep a good game down. Why are you looking at me like that? Natsume continued to release games under the Harvest Moon name, showcasing just how powerful the brand name alone was. Skytree Village, Light of Hope, One World, no matter how you name it, it's all the same game anyway. It makes it feel like they just made these for a quick cash grab, hoping to keep selling their games to anyone who didn't know about the split of 2014 with Marvelous. And even for a young teenager who fell for the trick back in 2016 with Skytree Village, I could tell. Oh, and whoever the character designers are, they're not getting paid enough. That doesn't mean Marvelous stopped porting their games overseas. Take notes, Level 5. Marvelous had found a new localization company in Xseed Games, who would continue to localize the games to this day, starting their partnership in 2008. But while Xseed did help localize some of their games, Natsume was still kind of in the picture, but just up until about 2014. Because of legal issues with Natsume, they didn't have the rights to the Harvest Moon name anymore, meaning they would have to start their branding over again with a new name for Western audiences. And that new name was Story of Seasons. Anyway, that's just a brief run through of the history behind Harvest Moon Story of Seasons, and I still need to talk about what the hell is up with this. Rune Factory, a fantasy Harvest Moon. This was released in 2006 for the Nintendo DS with the purpose of creating an action RPG with the farming sim and social elements the Bokujo Monogatari games were most known for. Just what the gaming scene's been waiting for! Damn it! This is another showcase of the strength behind the branding of Harvest Moon, not only being used to trick stupid teenagers, but to briefly create a bit of familiarity for a new title and introducing them to a new concept alongside it. Thank God at least this one is made by the same developers, right? Oh, damn it. Rune Factory was actually published by Marvelous, among some other companies, up until Xseed came in again to help them out with localizations. This spin-off franchise was developed by another studio and creator called Neverland and Yoshifumi Hashimoto, respectively. Also, remember when I mentioned Natsume was still in the picture while Xseed was also helping Marvelous out? Well, this is why. They kept this type of branding up until Rune Factory 2 in Japan, and Rune Factory 4 in 2012, where the Fantasy Harvest Moon subtitle disappeared from the game's overall title. And look where that got them. Yeah, the company behind Rune Factory eventually went bankrupt and thus marked the end of the series forever. Until Marvelous hired a bunch of the original Neverland staff into their company to form a branch off of it called Hakama Inc., and that marked the end of the series forever. Hakama developed some other titles here and there, but that was about it for the time. That is, until one day during a Nintendo Direct in 2019, where a miracle happened.
A heartfelt fantasy adventure crops up once again.
Rune Factory was back. A port of Rune Factory 4 for the Switch, with upgraded visuals, quality of life improvements, and a brand new side story for each of the romanceable candidates in the game. But that wasn't all. it was also revealed that a brand new Rune Factory title was in the works. The first new Rune Factory game since 2012. Rune Factory 5. Oh, thank God they figured it out. Releasing the most popular version of their franchise on a new hit console like the Switch, thus bringing a ton of new eyes to the series, and announcing there was a new game in the works for new and old fans alike to let them know that this series was here to stay? I think this helped make for a really strong return for Rune Factory as a whole. Although, the couple of people that did mention they were interested in checking out the new series said that they were going to hold out until the new game released instead of trying out the old 8-year-old port. Hold on, I can fix this. That should do it. And to those people, I am so sorry. Rune Factory 5 released and it definitely did. Okay, I'm exaggerating a little here. It wasn't a bad title, far from it, but it was definitely held back due to a couple things. One of these being a ton of very frequent frame drops. Furthermore, this game takes a spin at an engine similar to the ones the series' spin-off titles used. That's right, the spin-off has a spin-off! The game was also far slower than the previous titles, where loading zones were much longer due to the much larger size of the areas in this game. Not only that, the town was also significantly bigger, which made traversing it through frame drops and a slower feeling engine that much more of a struggle. The game had warp points, which did help, but it couldn't help the slower combat the game also donned thanks to the engine change. Rune Factory 5 was eventually released on PC, which did help a couple of the performance issues, but in tandem with the other issues the game had with some new and longtime fans alike, the damage had already been done. This was so unfortunate because Rune Factory 5 was a lot of people's first experiences with the Rune Factory series. Yeah, sure, the game looked fancier, but 4 Special wasn't even that bad in the visual department. Admittedly, it has a much simpler overworld art style, and the top-down perspective can feel a little dated depending on who you ask, but it still looks, plays, and holds up really well to this day. But they weren't done with Rune Factory just yet. In fact, during another Nintendo Direct in September of 2022, they did it again. They brought back an old title, and they announced that another brand new title was in the works. But this time, the game they chose to remake was Rune Factory 3. However, this time, neither Hakama nor Hashimoto himself would have any involvement with the newest Rune Factory remake. So, what gives? Well, for starters, let me introduce you to Shiro Maekawa. There's actually not a lot of information on him, specifically his involvement with Rune Factory, besides the fact that he joined Marvelous AQL back in 2011 after finishing up with... That's right, Maekawa was also involved in the writing and development for some of the Sonic the Hedgehog games, such as Shadow the Hedgehog and Sonic Adventure 2, among many other titles. Sometime between 2011 and August of 2022, which was the earliest instance I could find of him talking about anything Rune Factory related, he became the Rune Factory series' chief director, and one of the main spokespeople for Rune Factory thereafter. The reason for Hakama's absence with the development of Rune Factory 3 Special is unknown, especially after they had worked on Rune Factory 4 Special, but all I know for sure is that they're missing out. Rune Factory 3 was the last game to use the Fantasy Harvest Moon subheader, and the last game in the series released for the Nintendo DS. And also one of my favorite games of all time. One of the nicher titles in the series, yes, but at the same time, it was the first Rune Factory game to really find its footing in the gameplay department in my opinion, with tons of improvements made in comparison to the first 2 games. There was even this one article regarding Rune Factory 3 Special, where Maekawa mentions that they wanted to remake 3 in particular because, quote, he felt like it was the game that perfected the series' formula. I have not fact-checked this, but I agree with this, so I choose to believe it. I've seen a lot of core fans praise this game before when it was the newest Rune Factory game on the block, but it often felt overshadowed by Rune Factory 4's popularity when that eventually released. And once Rune Factory 5 released, people, for the most part, still continued to praise and discuss about Rune Factory 4. But I get it, having the option to pick your playable character and date some bachelors as well is a huge draw, especially for farming and social sims that rely so much on creating a personalized experience for the player to create the best experience possible. Despite that, I still have a soft spot in my heart for 3. There's so much to say here. Probably the best social system to this day in any farming sim game, a versatile revenue system that doesn't require you to farm crops if you'd rather make your money through the action RPG elements, a great roster of characters, good writing, gameplay, and art, and the whole world wheat. Don't ask a farming sim fan what happened during the Nintendo Direct of September 2022. Yep, this was one of the 4 farming games announced during the infamous Farming Direct. Which, as someone who likes farming sims myself, Even I felt like there were a lot of announcements. I could make an entire video about how interesting and important these announcements were for Farming Sim fans, but to the majority of Nintendo viewers who are probably looking for more first-party announcements, I can definitely understand the reaction.
Animal Crossing died for this?
Which makes it a grand shame that Rune Factory 3 Special was in the middle of all of this. Overshadowed once again, doomed to be disregarded and forgotten to time yet again. No, I won't let this happen. Not again. It's time to finally have this discussion. To show the world that this farming sim is like no other farming sim that came before or after it. A game truly undeserving of the lack of discussion that it currently gets. I just want someone to talk about what makes this game so special. And if nobody else wants to do it, I guess the guy who bought Skytree Village will have to do it. Let's talk about Rune Factory 3 Special. The game begins with a... Damn it. Fortunately, the Woolly, basically a Rune Factory sheep, lands right in front of a flower shop, conveniently enough where one of the residents could take it inside and try to nurse it back to health. However, the town's mayor and the girl's grandpa comes downstairs to see his granddaughter lugging a monster from the outside and advises against it. I know the game's trying to make him out to be this opposing perspective, but if I was in his shoes, I'd probably agree with him too. Again. Shut up! The next morning, the Woolly transformed into a human, before waking up and wandering the town. He encounters the girl who saved him, and then the most universally agreed on romance candidate I have ever seen from a farming sim. But you don't get it. I can fix her. The next thing he knows, he is now living inside the Sharon's tree, which is kind of like sacred grounds for the residents of this town, because apparently you can do that. And that's the introduction to Rune Factory 3 Special. It's a little simple, but it gives the player a glimpse of the types of characters that they'll be encountering throughout the game. And trust me, this is only the surface. After the player's been settled in, they are finally introduced to the game's tutorials. First up, a Nintendo fan's worst nightmare. Second place goes to Fire Emblem. Before that, however, the action RPG elements introduce themselves. Your cheap hoe is good enough for one, but when two enemies present themselves, that's when the local blacksmith comes in just in time, holding every weapon class in the game. First of all, having the selection right after the game teaches you how to save is such a smart game design decision, so you can reset very conveniently if you don't like the weapon you picked. This game in general is so clever with its introductions to story and game mechanics. Instead of being told where to go directly, while talking to the villagers, you can overhear them talking about a pesky raccoon, and how it has affected each and every one of them. This is such a neat way to introduce the player to story progression without making them feel like a chosen one character, where you try and search for this raccoon out of curiosity rather than because the story told you to. Whilst the mayor does eventually bring this up with you if you approach Prevera Forest, but it's still just an interaction that piques the main characters' curiosity, instead of being an explicit push to help the town villagers out. I am kind of bummed that they changed the interaction in the remake, because in the original, the interaction helped make this feel less of a heroic quest, and more of a favor as the newest town resident, which created a more natural sense of player immersion with the innocence in the dialogue, cause the raccoon isn't even a raccoon. But he doesn't know that yet. The game story then handles story progression as expected once you finish the first story beat and defeat the raccoon. Cutscenes play to imply something new has changed to tell the player that this would be where the story goes next without explicitly stating this is where you should go next, keeping the sense of leading the player to the next story beat through curiosity. Though, as the game's plot goes on, the main character then gets the sense of responsibility and all to go hunt for these bosses eventually. But at least to the story's credit, they developed this pretty naturally, by having the player do it after a connection has been developed with the town's residents that the problems have been directly affecting. This makes the characters' motivations feel more realistic rather than entirely altruistic. On top of that, now the main character also has his own desire. While it helps that these things are strung together in a way that the player can't miss the next story beat, it does kind of make the pacing of the game feel a little too fast, since you can jump straight into the next plot point after completing the last one. The main story itself is pretty short, but that's okay, he's perfect just the way he is. However, this is where the real bulk of the game comes in, and where the strengths of this game's pacing and storytelling comes into play. That being, this game's take on hard events. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the social sim aspect of farming sims, heart events are short interactions that revolve around a specific character, usually done one-on-one to showcase some sort of growth with your relationship with them, or to showcase their own growth in character, told through a short story that usually involves player interaction in some way. Rune Factory also does this, but each game has its own approach to it. In Rune Factory 3's case, this game has a job board, which, on the surface, seems like your typical RPG quest system. You take a quest, do something for an NPC, and get a reward for completing it. But the way it's handled here turns it into so much more. This game combines both the heart events from Story of Seasons and its general RPG quest system. It was a combination that was first introduced in Rune Factory 2, but was brought one step further when it was brought back for this game. This is such a cool way to integrate the heart events from Harvest Moon and Story of Seasons, and turn it into something immersive and unique. How did they never bring this back? Well, they did bring back the job board in future installments, but now it's used for more generic quests than anything related to character development. This is fine too, of course, because it still serves a purpose to teach the player all the different mechanics and gameplay features, but why would you trade that for this? The quest in 3 not only found a clever way to introduce tools and mechanics to the player, but they also served as an introduction to the character that introduced it to you. It got the player to give each character a chance, and if you liked what you saw, you can then actively seek out more of these quests, allowing you to see more of their story. And once you get to know the characters well enough, they become more comfortable around you, and send you personalized quests to your mailbox. These start becoming less of a general quest you'd expect from RPGs, and instead lean heavily towards developing their character arcs. And I think it's such a cool way to demonstrate character bonds, as well as the friendships you make through gameplay elements. I find that the future installments just don't have that depth anymore, mostly because they focused more on having full one-shot storylines than small bits of their story revealed to the player over time. Rune Factory 4's take on the heart events has these long singular events after you confess or get confessed to by the character of your choice. So for the first few hours of the game, you're just giving gifts to a character shallowly. The game doesn't really give you a reason to give gifts to characters because their stories don't start until after you've made a commitment. Kinda just pick someone at the beginning and then go from there. You're not given much of a reason to care before that point besides their general dialogue, which, yes, shows some personality, but it doesn't build off of that until several hours into the game. Asking someone out was all about getting them to a certain heart level and hoping that the odds roll favorably, especially since that's when their character development starts. By the time you're done with the character development in 3, you've already hit rank 10 and it feels like no time passed at all. Yeah, you could argue that after the final event at rank 10 there's nothing more to look forward to, and Rune Factory 4 on the other hand has something to look forward to instead. But the build-up isn't really that worth it in my opinion, because it feels like nothing's happening for the first 7 heart levels. There's no meaning to the levels, it's just a bunch of numbers that tells you how close you are to starting. Anything before 7 could be replaced with one really long level with a huge XP requirement, and fundamentally, nothing would change. Rune Factory 3 does a much better job at measuring your progress, and giving more reason and worth to each heart event and level. All of Rune Factory 4's characters feel gated by romance, and sometimes I'm just not ready for that commitment. By spreading these events through the game's main story, it creates this natural pacing where the world is actively moving both your story and theirs at the same rate. While preparing to explore a dungeon further to progress through the story, maybe a new event pops up for a character in between that downtime that you can check out. You actually get to feel invested in these characters and these stories. Your incentive to give gifts is to see what happens next in their lives and where their story goes from there. But I'm also talking about a game where you can date anime characters, so take that how you will. Some of these quests actually change their dialogue and behavior depending on how their stories go, creating the sense of change and realism that these events actually happen and affect these characters, instead of just happening for the sake of telling a story completely separate from the main game, where the character then continues to treat you like normal until the next event when they remember they're supposed to be grumpy and angry at you. The immersion through this gameplay feature alone is crazy. Sure, some of the characters in future installments do this as well, but I feel like it's not done nearly as much as Rune Factory 3 takes it. The romanceable candidates specifically each have their own unique storylines, where they are introduced as these one-note characters. Karina is the shopkeeper's daughter, who is lazy and takes naps on the job and prefers the shoppers to do the bagging themselves. Colette is a foodie who just loves to eat and has a lightning-fast metabolism that lets her do just that and more. Raven is a tsundere, cold, keeps her distance from you, and that's literally all there is to her introduction. That's all it takes, apparently. It's okay! I can fix her! But as you see more of these storylines, you begin to learn that they are far more than what the game leads you to think. The way their stories handle each character's quirk within their character development is really cool, and through that, Rune Factory 3 somehow finds a way to create depth in something that should be really shallow and simple. I love this take on the generic one-note caricature, where each character can easily be described in one sentence or even one word. Normally this is a flaw in character design, but Rune Factory 3 takes the idea and turns it into a huge strength for each character in the game. I'm trying to keep things as vague and spoiler-free as I can, in case you guys want to check out Rune Factory 3's hard event job board hybrids for yourselves, because these are actually really good story arcs in my opinion. The characters in this game are far more than what they seem at the beginning, and this is where the game's writing truly shines for me. There are 11 romanceable candidates in this game, so if there's a storyline you're just not feeling, you're not locked into this or anything, and can start another one if you'd like. Not to mention these job quests don't only develop the characters whose quest you've accepted, but can also develop the people close to them as well. It kind of feels like what town events in Rune Factory 4 were supposed to be, but executed with a more freeform approach. So how do other games use the job board system? Well, 4 and 5 use the job board in similar ways, which is, as I said earlier, to introduce game mechanics, give you stuff to do and complete, and unlock more things to do in the shops. So how did they substitute Rune Factory 3's job board and hard event hybrid before any of the bachelorettes get their storyline? You get town events. Events that are randomly selected, happen at random times, and are completely out of your control, which sometimes completely limits certain game elements until you finish the town event. You can delay it, but you can't pause it to do it later. You are forced to do the whole thing before you can bring characters along with you to dungeons, which can get really annoying in this game specifically because they're very nice to have around you in gameplay. The characters in this game are wacky, off-the-wall crazy, and just plain silly. Even outside of the romanceable characters, all of the characters in this game are so much fun, and they contribute just as much to the just as fun writing. Another thing I really like about this game specifically is that some of the characters have their own friend groups, which if you find them nearby each other, can give you unique dialogue that includes all of them together. I hate to sound like a broken record, but the writing and dynamics found within these character interactions are just so cool and fun, and continues to create this sense of realism and depth to these characters and their relationships with the other town residents. Sure, they have these to an extent like with Doug and Dillis in Rune Factory 4, but they don't really interact with each other besides the occasional snarky comment behind each other's backs. As for outside these events, it doesn't end there either. The main character also has a really fun dynamic with the characters in this game. One of my favorite dynamics is with Daria, where the two of them just have almost daily banter with each other. The way it's all written is really silly and is just one of the many examples of how the characters can interact in this game. The main character is able to match their energy, and I think that adds so much to the social element of the game, since that's what you'll be doing for a good portion of the playtime. Oh yeah, another thing about the writing. What? An anime game with no anime? This game continues to defy expectations. Okay, well, not exactly. The writing still feels kind of anime, but all of the hot spring stuff that would make you roll your eyes is very mitigated compared to the other games after it. This is something that I felt the later games sort of struggled with. Some of the writing makes it feel so hard to recommend the games to a general audience, specifically when it feels like one of those generic anime hot spring scenes that have been done to death. The jokes and humor in this game can get silly at times, but even Pia's random equals funny bits can be charming in its own right. And there were some really clever jokes in the original, like Pia asking if I want a bath, or if I wanted to be a bath. Which I needed a tweet to help me understand that this was an alphabet joke. She's random, but she's got some quips. However, I should note there is a new feature in the remaster that makes it so that all characters with swimsuits will wear them at all times, which kind of lands a significant blow to this point, but at least that's optional. And I'm not sure if I can trust a person that uses this unironically. Speaking of the remaster, I won't speak like I understand how legal issues regarding localizations and translations work, but considering the original Japanese voice actors all reprised their roles, and the English cast had all of their roles recast, and that they explicitly mentioned the need to retranslate the original game with mentions of concerns regarding the original names of characters, I think it's safe to say that there is a reason they didn't use the original voice cast. This admittedly had me skeptical at first, as well as many others of which I've seen. Yeah, sure, some of the voices weren't perfect in the original, but the original VAs for characters like Sakuya and Carlos felt like they absolutely nailed the personalities and characteristics of their respective characters. But on the bright side, with Rune Factory 4 already having a pretty all-star cast, and Rune Factory 5 getting even more top-level VAs for their game, I was hopeful that Rune Factory 3 Special would get the same treatment. And when I saw who was voicing Colette, I knew everything was gonna be okay. I dare I say it, actually don't mind the new voice cast. I know! They finally gave us the option to pick the Japanese or English voiceovers, a feature that was very frequently requested, and I still picked the dub. Sue me! Well, I mean, since he asked. Yeah, there are some deliveries and lines that I miss, but I think that could also be from the voice direction side, since the voice actors they did pick are all really talented in their own right. It could also be due to the legal issues again, perhaps, to try and not stick too closely to the original deliveries or lines, but I don't know, I'm not a lawyer. If I was, I probably wouldn't be dealing with a lawsuit right now. I just wanted to listen to the dub. Because of this retranslation, however, we did end up losing out on some iconic lines.
Check out the sun, dude.
It's called having a lightning-fast metabolism.
And
Always speaking in opposites.
are all gone, sadly, from the special variant. But honestly, despite all that, I did get used to most of the new voices eventually. Especially characters like Sakuya, despite having a very different approach in comparison to the original voice direction. The original VA fit more of her cheerful, optimistic attitude with a friendly personality,
Hello! Sure! Huh?
while the new VA leans more into her grounded business mindset with a much calmer tone to her deliveries.
Morning! Sure thing! Huh? Oh, right! Appreciate it.
Personally, I think both of these takes on Sakuya are great, and all for different reasons, which I think is cool. But there is another thing about the dub that does actually, to my boiling core, bother me. The fact that I can't even hear it at all.
From around the world will soon be beating a path at my door!
Okay, fess up. Who let the sub enjoyers do the mixing? The sound mixing in 3 Special is very wonky. I know some of the lines in the original version also had some questionable sound mixing, but it's crazy that they didn't even make a setting to adjust the volume individually for the music or the voices. Something that even the newest game does. Some characters sound fine, and some other characters have their repeated voice lines at pretty fair volumes. But a lot of the fully voiced lines are completely drowned out by the music. And the only way to hear them properly is to toggle the music off. Although, while I was editing this video, they did update the game with a quality of life patch, which allowed you to toggle the background music to some extent. However, you can only do it on the title screen and not in the settings of the actual game. Not sure what that's about, but at least the change is there, which is still very much appreciated. And again, this is all speculation because, again, lawsuit. They got the Amber VA for Colette. I don't know what else I was supposed to do. But it does suck that we lose out on some iconic moments from the original. However, I don't think the changes are as bad as some of the people are making it out to be. But what about the gameplay? Good writing is one thing and all, but I'm playing a video game at the end of the day. Well, if Rune Factory 1 was the game that walked so the series could run, Rune Factory 3 was the one that allowed the series to sprint. It completely overhauls the movement and weapons in this game to create something more fleshed out, such as adding even more attacks to make the weapons feel more balanced. Animations are way faster compared to the first 2 games, making the game feel much smoother. You can now hold multiple items at a time, making things that used to be a hassle in the first 2 games so much more intuitive, such as gifting 1 gift instead of the whole stack of 9, while also being able to give multiple gifts for certain quests that ask for more than 1 item. It also gives you the ability to put away those damn weeds 9 at a time, instead of 1. Yeah, the older games were an experience. This game was also the first in the series that introduced the system where if your HP reaches 0 in the first dungeon, Marjorie at the apothecary ends up healing you for free. I always thought this was a really nice way to treat the first dungeon as one big introduction, to allow players to learn the ropes of the game's combat, dungeon exploration, and all of that. Once you beat the first boss though, you'll have to start coughing up some gold on each whiteout. 3 Special even adds some quality of life improvements future installments had, such as holding A to buffer the pickup option as you run around clearing your farm, being able to select the player character's birthday, quick selecting and sorting within your storage, or using the R button to dash, all features originating from Rune Factory 4. More movement, more tech, more attacks, faster animations and UI, this is a huge overhaul from the original engines. Pretty much everything here is overhauled, from magic spells, to forging, to crafting, to farming. Okay, hold on, let's slow down a bit. While this remains true for Rune Factory 3 at the time, for those who started with future installments, you might hear these quality of life additions and think, wow, this is great! I can't wait to play Rune Factory 3 Special with all of these improvements the future games provide. And you'd be wrong. Unfortunately, while some things were improved from 3 to 3 Special, some things were left behind. Improvements such as bulk crafting, RP consumption indicators, and cooking bread not being consumed if you can't learn anything from them, among other things. They were afraid of making the perfect Rune Factory game, and it shows. If they ironed these mechanics out to be more in line with the future games, this would have been a far more solid glow-up, having the crafting depth of 4 and some extra gameplay changes introduced then and since. It's such a shame that these improvements weren't added, since a lot of people really enjoy this depth and control over how you build your kits in future installments. Sure, you can still do that in 3 to some extent, but if New Horizons can't get away with this, neither can 3. Speaking of forging and crafting, this is a gameplay feature where you can use materials to create brand new items such as shields, weapons, etc., or you can use these materials to upgrade said shields, weapons, etc. Most of the things that you obtain in this game will have some sort of upgrade benefit that you can then add to your gear. Sometimes it's flat addition to stats, and sometimes it's benefits that work in the background, such as a crit rate increase or a poison chance decrease. From scrap metal to mob drops to boss drops, you can create a variety of different builds and kits, depending on what you have and what you're looking for. So, how does Rune Factory 3's forging and crafting differ from the ones in future installments? In Rune Factory 4, for example, forging and crafting is based off of your respective level. Forging is for weapons, and crafting is for gear, to put things simply. Depending on what the respective skill level and the level of the material you would like to use is, the RP cost to complete the item successfully will vary. For making new items, each recipe also has a minimum level attached to it, which you'll have to take into account. In Rune Factory 3, on the other hand, if you're making something, each recipe will also have a minimum level, but when it comes to successfully crafting it, it's RNG based. Your success rate scales off of your skill level, and for upgrades, the level of the tool you're trying to upgrade as well. If you're way too far off the skill level requirement, then you will have a 0% success rate. But if you're even slightly within the range, usually at least under 10 levels, that 5% can change a lot. Some people prefer the way it's done in Rune Factory 4, but I kinda like the success rate approach Rune Factory 3 uses. Though, coupled with the fact that bulk crafting isn't a thing, making increasing those skill levels a lot more tedious, I can see why 3's forging and crafting in general is widely seen as inferior. But it's really funny when stuff like this happens.
But we get it, baby! Let's go!
Okay.
2 for 2! Woo-hoo-hoo!
Now let's talk more about the action in this action RPG farming simulator hybrid. The difficulty in Rune Factory 3 I find can actually be quite challenging. Just like what you'd expect from an action RPG, you can fight a multitude of bosses as you play through the game. These bosses will appear at the end of each dungeon and mark the end of each story beat, each with their own unique battle gimmick that I'll let you guys discover for yourself. If you're just starting out with Rune Factory 3 as your first game, these can feel quite difficult at times. Yeah, sure, if you're familiar with Rune Factory gameplay and stuff, with the right tools, damage output can get pretty crazy at times, causing most of the bosses to be cheesed pretty easily. But when I started out with Rune Factory 3, I didn't have the know-how to utilize forging or the elemental skills to its full potential, so I had to tackle these on fresh. And honestly, despite being pretty tough, I think the boss fights here are really fresh and interesting. Plus, the challenge it can provide to a newcomer can get pretty fun at times. Fun is subjective. Okay, so what about the farming? I'm playing a farming sim. Well, it's optional. Sort of. The anime farming sim with no anime or farming. Yeah, you can still play the game like a farming sim, but with all of the options around you being equally viable in terms of income, it feels more like it got power crept. You can still farm if you'd like for some of the game's festivals, and it is mandatory for one of the dungeons, but the latter only asks you to grow some of the simpler crops in the game. So for the parts in this game where farming is expected to be used, it's not really much of a hassle. Well, that is, unless you want to get your level 10 growth spread on your turnip. So when I mean it's optional, I mean you'll probably only do it 3 times during the entire main story. Mob drops are fairly easy to farm thanks to the frequency of the drops and the amount they sell for. Fishing also provides some pretty good results in terms of income. Of course, when it comes to passive income, there's nothing that'll beat good old farming. I'm just showcasing how versatile this game can get with earning income outside of farming. And yeah, if you aren't a fan of the farming and farming sims, you can treat this game just like an action RPG with a farming element. Kind of like how Minecraft is a sandbox game with farming elements to some extent. Stardew Valley was designed in a similar way, providing the player with the option to play the game however they like. But considering this game was most likely intended to be designed around both farming and action, it's a bit of a confusing point in terms of its game design, but there's one big reason why farming just felt so weird to me in this game. And that is the lack of a fertilizer bin. Rune Factory 3 introduced soil deterioration, a mechanic that, as the name implies, makes soil quality worse the more you plant in the same plot of land. This feature can get annoying as it makes crops longer and harder to grow the more you use those tiles, and the only thing you can do is spend some extra money on growth improvements like the fertilizer or Formula A, deliberately grow dead weeds, or wait it out. Rune Factory 4 had a great remedy to this mechanic, while still keeping a level of depth to the soil mechanic. With the fertilizer bin, players can manage the level of their soil by keeping it filled with greens and other compostable objects you have on your farm, which you can then invest into increasing your soil quality. It provides the player with a bit of depth and consideration with how they manage the produce from their farmland, and produces a simple yet efficient way to keep your soil healthy, which is great for what is expected to be a therapeutic and relaxing gameplay mechanic. Oh, and Rune Factory 3 also has the chef girl, I guess. Colette! Not only a great character in her own right, but she comes along with two unique gimmicks that makes this game feel very unbalanced. I guess I should also explain the buddy system a bit here. Rune Factory is a feature where you can have someone tag along with you to follow you around as you explore the dungeon, or in certain cases, the towns. Prior to Rune Factory 3, you could only have monsters tag along with you once you get a monster barn. But now you can invite the villagers to tag along with you as well after you reach a specific heart level with them. Inside dungeons specifically, they can fight and use skills alongside the player in order to aid you in clearing them. So now let's get into the two things that make Colette so unique. The first is that she is a glass cannon character. She has next to no defensive stats to her name, but what she does pack instead is a mean punch. A weapon with a base attack of 192. For reference, the axe, the default weapon of the same weapon class the lollipop is from, has 10. This allows her to absolutely clear the first act of the game no problem. The first dungeon in Rune Factory games usually aren't that challenging anyways, but with Colette, she turns it into something trivial. She can also make early game grinding very simple, with how under the right circumstances, she can hold her own fairly well in the next two dungeons. And her second gimmick is that she can cook. Colette is a mechanic where when the player is in a room with an active monster, she can throw food your way to heal you. Or poison you sometimes, as she can conjure up practically any food item in the game. The thing is, she can miss, and you can pick those meals up, and you can sell them. Around every 45 in-game minutes, yes I labbed it, Colette will throw you a new food item if there's still an enemy in the room, and if you don't have this icon, which tells the game you've already eaten a meal. Or potions as well in this game. An interesting design choice admittedly, where you get rewarded in some capacity one way or another, but with how specific rooms are designed, and with the AI in this game getting stuck fairly commonly trying to pathfind their way to the player, you can create setups like this. And you never have to look at that farmland again. So depending on who you are and how you look at the game, it either allows you to play the game in a very flexible manner, giving players the freedom to play in whatever way they feel works best with them, while also giving multiple strategies to make the game more diverse and interesting for future runs. Or it allows you to play the game with a block of cheese. But since this is just a byproduct of an admittedly very cute feature, taking into account Colette's profession through attention to detail, this isn't really that bad. Even despite the farming being more tedious compared to the other installments, farming will always be profitable in this game at the end of the day, and it still keeps a level of depth to make things interesting and worth delving further into if you're a big fan of the farming mechanics. But if you think farming is weird, try giving this approach a shot, and then you can turn the video title into the action RPG game you didn't know you had. So that's the good and the bad, the strengths and the weaknesses of both 3 and its special variant. Now let's talk about the weird. Because we talked about gameplay, characters, quality of life improvements, but there's one thing missing. All Rune Factory stories start with the same premise. The main character gets amnesia. There's no punchline, it's just a constant. Rune Factory 1's story fully plays into the main character's amnesia, trying to figure out who he is and why he's there. Rune Factory 2's story revolves around the main characters as child, learning and discovering bits and pieces on why their father left them. I'm serious. Rune Factory 4's story revolves around a couple of things, since it's probably the longest in the series. But for the sake of keeping that mainly spoiler-free as well, it is about breathing new life into a dying land. Rune Factory 5's story is kinda hard to explain spoiler-free as well, but I can say that it has themes and morals that it tries to develop. So, what about Rune Factory 3? Fortunately, they use some of this in the marketing, so I can kind of go a bit more in depth with this. Up until now, I've been trying to keep things spoiler-free, mentioning and using footage of as little late-game stuff as possible. From here onwards, I'm going to be going into a bit more depth with the last couple of points that I wanted to bring up with Rune Factory 3. So I'll bring up whenever I'm going to mention a spoiler, with a time code to skip to if you'd like to remain spoiler-free. The main character is dropped, literally, into this strange world, one where he has no recollection of who he is or where he is, with a goal that he doesn't know about just yet: bring the two nations together to reconcile and unify once again. One thing I like about the execution of this story is that the main character has to piece this together and figure things out, without having the help of anything prophetic or a guide at his side leading the way. It feels very progressive and natural, despite the goal having a lot of responsibility behind it. Unfortunately, like I said earlier, the game is very short, and because of that, it doesn't really get a chance to tell each side of the story in a fleshed out way. What do I mean by this? Here's the timestamp that you can skip to. I really like the story concept, and how the game handles it in theory. The main character meets both nations, and learns about both sides of history through each of their flawed perceptions of it. That being, even they don't know what the hell is going on, and they just know that they're supposed to hate each other. You, as the player, learn more about them by doing their respective story quests, giving you equal opportunities to get to know each other, all building towards the climactic point in the story, where you have to convince each other to open their eyes and that there is good to both nations. Or that's how it was supposed to go. Instead, in the 4 main acts that you have to go through before that point, you only get to interact with the Universe Settlement once, and the Human Village 3 times. It's a real shame too, because I think with a bit more development, slowly connecting the player to each side and giving reasons to sympathize with each of their struggles and perspectives could have been so interesting. The Universe don't get nearly enough development compared to the other village, making them feel easily forgettable. Unless you really like Karuna, then more power to you. This game would have benefited so much from having more acts, like the 8 dungeon story beats the first game had. Maybe with each odd and even number of dungeons alternating who you'd be helping out this time. Maybe even as the story progresses, while you're doing a quest for the Universe, another human could show up in one of those rooms, providing more confrontation and conflict for the story to build off of. While the story the game did end up executing wasn't all bad, it's still quite alright. That's all it is. Just alright. And it's so unfortunate because I like this game so much, and by seeing and imagining the potential it could have had as a story of 2 nations, with conflicting ideals, struggles, and perspectives, I just wish there was a little bit more. But if that's all there was to the story, I wouldn't be praising this game as the underrated gem that everyone should see. I can't really say if this was a theme that the writers were trying to convey, but there's another theme that matches with all of the writing that I ended up noticing by doing this specific playthrough. So, let's talk about that. A cool theme that I noticed about Rune Factory 3's writing is that it all centers around change. From the plot changing tradition and uniting one another instead of continuing to separate, to the characters not settling for who they once were and growing past their one-note characteristics to what they want to become, to the Sharon Street itself, also going through change by changing as progress is made within the game. I could go off on this all day if I wanted to, but I'll name just a couple examples to keep things brief. Once again, here's a timestamp if you would like to avoid spoilers for the character arcs of Raven, Colette, Karina, and Sophia. In Raven's case, she slowly changes her demeanor and warms up to you over time, changing her absolute black and white outlook on life. The Woolly left because of her. Humans cannot live in harmony with monsters, and so on and so forth. Sophia wasn't always speaking in opposites. She one day suddenly changed to talk just like her father. As she learns more about how this way of speaking affects her and the people around her though, she starts changing back. Karina's story is about her trying to change her lifestyle and to be more proactive. She talks like she doesn't want to make an effort, but she does end up showing a genuine desire to actually attempt change and go out of her comfort zone as a result. Colette's story arc is all about looking for change in the wrong places, in things that she feels will help her grow literally and metaphorically, such as her height and her cooking respectively. Throughout her heart events and character growth, she eventually learns to be true to herself and finds new love in the passion that she already had, which was cooking. It all comes back to change. Surface level, this game is a farming sim with action RPG elements and a romance system to find true love. Then it's a story about unifying two nations that have been scorning each other from afar for years and years. But deep down, to me, this game is about self-improvement and growth, both literally and figuratively, growing from who you once were and changing into something new with everything you've learned from the mistakes you've made, and moving past that. Again, this is not an official confirmed story or motive or anything. It was just an observation I had about a theme that I had noticed with everything I had experienced, and I thought it was worth giving it its own section. I see a lot of people talk about how they believe that farming sims have plateaued. They all look the same, and that nothing will ever come close to the behemoth that is Stardew Valley. And don't get me wrong, I believe Stardew Valley deserves its spot at the top with the way it reimagines the farming simulator genre, creating a level of accessibility that was unseen before it, its dedication and commitment to adding free new updates even to this day, and the way it was able to introduce tons of new people to the genre. But I don't think that means the other farming sim games that came around then and since have stagnated either. Not in the slightest. In Rune Factory's case, it's always improving and changing, with each installment redefining what it means to be a farming sim. Even with the critically acclaimed Rune Factory 4, the not-so-critically acclaimed Rune Factory 5, and the quirky natures of the first two Rune Factory games, all of these games have created new and unique experiences to innovate and add new spins to its own franchise. And it seems like that's their goal, to avoid making the next one feel like the last, thus making each game feel even more special. But Rune Factory 3 takes it one step further. Rune Factory 3 has proven that it was able to stand out from what it meant to not only be a farming sim, but also a Rune Factory game, with the way it utilizes gameplay to support its plot, how it immerses the player into a community that feels real, and with how it uses simple concepts to create a simple twist with a lot of depth to it. And to this day, these continue to be exclusive to Rune Factory 3. Even now, I have not found a single farming sim game that feels anything like what I experienced with Rune Factory 3. Rune Factory 3 Special is far from a perfect game, but it had all of the things it needed to make it one of the most memorable farming sims I have ever played. It's my perfect game. Whether your favorite game is perfect or not, if a game just feels right to you, then I think at the end of the day, that's what matters the most. Almost. Rune Factory 3 has shown me that they have what it takes to make a really interesting and unique farming sim, with interesting story concepts, characters, and gameplay elements. With the announcement of the brand new spin-off title for Rune Factory and Project Dragon, as well as the next installment in the mainline Rune Factory series, it seems like the developers are showing us that they plan on keeping Rune Factory alive and thriving. And it's for this reason that I can't wait to see what the series has in store for farming sims next.